case people are watching online without being part of the Zoom. And it also enables us to record it and play it, and so people can watch it later. Let me just now, all right, close this, and we're ready to go. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We had what I consider we continue on our little path down learning about Pirkei Avot, which again is the ethics or sayings, let's call it, of our ancestors. And just to give you a little bit of just a reminder as to where this is coming from, after the Bible was written, then in anticipation of the destruction of a new paradigm in Judaism, and in anticipation of the changing of Judaism from a faith of sacrifice and priests and stuff like that, we went to becoming a religion of laws and rules, and we wrote something called the Mishnah, Mishnah, and in writing the Mishnah, those were just laws that were written down by people in the 2nd century, referencing things that were said by rabbis or sages prior. Now, when were they doing this? When were these sages speaking, teaching, coming up with these ideas and laws? That's a good question and a different story. Over the course of many, many years, a couple of centuries, in fact. Right now, we are, and by the way, this Mishnah would then be, the Mishnah in general, not just this, would become the basis of the Talmud, which would be discussions of these laws and sayings. Now, most of the people that we will be talking about, starting in, let's say, a few weeks from now, most of them will be living around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple and later. Most of them will be later, so right afterwards. So most of the people that we'll be referencing will be living in roughly anywhere from the earliest to 60 CE, mostly though later to 150 CE. However, the first chapter, or at least the first number of Periks that we're reading, Mishnahs that we're reading, are about earlier periods. So it's happening chronologically. And we started with Moses. The first one just talks about Moses, who got the Torah, and then Joshua, and then the elders, and then the prophets, and then the men of the Great Assembly. And the men of the Great Assembly references the people who came back from Persia with Ezra to reestablish Israel. But then afterwards, we met Shimon the righteous, who was the last of the men of the Great Assembly, and then we met Antigonus of Soho, and then we met Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan, and these two were what was called the beginning of the period of the Zugot, which was the pairs. In other words, those two. And so we read again a quote or a thought by one of the two pairs, and then the other one, Yossi ben Yoezer, and then Yossi ben Yochanan. We read about those two last week. And what we learned also in reading about them was typically the first one of the pair that we read. So again, just looking quickly back at number 4, remember, so it's the fourth one where it talks about Yossi ben Yoezer. a man of Zereda, and Yossi ben Yochanan, a man of Jerusalem. And then it will say what Yossi ben Yoezer said. And then the next one will be what Yossi ben Yochanan said. But the point is that the first one was what was referred to as the Nasi, the president of the Sanhedrin. And the second one would be kind of the chief judge. And that will be the case for a number of these people. And I'll describe that for you again later. But the point is that so now we're still reading about these pairs. And the last group lived during the time of the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans. And now we're reading about a new group who lived slightly after the Maccabees. However, unfortunately, the dates of their lives are a little bit more complicated. And the reason why is because on the one hand, we get the sense that they lived at, let's say, around, I don't know, 120 BCE. But then on the other hand, we wonder if they didn't live a little later. And I will explain to you why I would think that in just a moment. So let's learn about these next two. So we're on number 6 in our pamphlet. Okay, number 6. So the best way for us to do it is by just reading it through one time, getting a couple of thoughts about it, and then maybe we'll go into a little bit of background about these people in a moment. So would anyone be kind enough to read for me number 6 in English, of course? Mark, go ahead.
Okay, now that I learned how to unmute, I'm going to go ahead. So number 6, Joshua ben Pariah and Nittai the Arbalite received the oral tradition from them. Joshua ben Pariah used to say, appoint for thyself a teacher and acquire for thyself a companion and judge all men with the scale weighted in his favor.
Okay, thank you so much. So just to be clear, when it says Joshua ben Parachia and Nittai the Arbalite received the tradition from them, who is them? It's referring to our friends in the previous 2 Mishnahs, right? So the previous 2 ones we met, Yossi ben Yochanan and Yossi ben Yoezer. So what it's referring to is that Joshua ben Parachia is a student or a disciple of those 2, as is Nittai the Arbalite. So what I thought we'd do is let's meet them a little bit, because again, in meeting them, we get to know a little bit more about who they are and about maybe why they said the things that they said. So let me just make sure I've got this set up correctly. If so, good. There we are. Okay, so let me just spotlight this to make it a little bit easier for you. There we are. Okay, so so the first background piece that I want to share with you comes from the Talmud. I try my best to make them all just stories from our tradition, but old stories, so they would be roughly at the time period. And so this one is just a little background about this guy named Rabbi Joshua ben Parachia. It said, so again, whoever's writing this is merely kind of pointing out a story that they once heard, because it says it is taught in a baraita, which means the baraita is a just something that's not part of the Mishnah, but still kind of a well-known saying or well-known story. And again, just as a reminder, anything that is in bold is the actual Talmudic passage. If it's in if it's unbold or just regular font, that means it's just some extra help for you. So it's taught in a baraita that Rabbi Joshua ben Parachia said, initially, in response to anyone who would say to me, ascend to the position of Nasi, I would tie him up and place him in front of a lion out of anger for his suggestion. Now that I've become the Nasi, in response to anyone who tells me to leave the position, I would throw a kettle of boiling water at him out of anger at his suggestion. So what do we learn about Yehoshua, which, by the way, is the Hebrew for Joshua ben Parachia? Well, I think the first thing that we can say about him is that he's humble, right? Or at least, but he's not. He might be humble, but he's also kind of honest. In other words, he's realistic, right? He says at the beginning, he said, "I would never." Remember, he is in charge. He is the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, of the governmental group of the Jews, and he's the president. And if someone would have asked him if he would want to be president, he would have said, "Not in a million years. I would tie him up and place him in front of a lion." But admittedly, now that I'm the president, I kind of like it. And I wouldn't want to have it taken away from me. So just a nice little sense of who he is. Humble at first, at least, but honest. Because he says I wouldn't have wanted, but now I'm admitting to the fact that at first I never wanted this in my life, but now I'm kind of admitting that I like it. Now, what else do we know about? Oh, Laura, go ahead.
Didn't you mention last week, I thought this was fascinating, that he was one of Jesus's teachers?
I did. We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Not there yet.
I'll put my hand
So
up.
number two, what do we know about him? Well, what we do know about him is that, and you can tell, well, you have to, there's a lot of background to this, but I'm just going to tell you and you're just going to trust me. However, it starts with the fact that Nitai, his friend, is an Arbalite, and Arbel is located in the Galilee. And so it turns out, and Joshua ben Parachia was also actually from and lived in the Galilee, which is, and the reason why we know this is because we also discovered his grave in the Galilee. And so as a result, we know he's from the Galilee. Again, we're not exactly sure of his dates. And the only reason why we don't know his dates is because on the one hand, when you place him in this list of pairs, then we kind of feel compelled to make his dates around 120 BCE. However, since he was probably a teacher of Jesus, we have to ask ourselves, well, was it a little bit later? We know that Jesus's dates, I think Jesus was born in 35 BCE or something like that. And so therefore we have to kind of assume that maybe his dates are a little bit later. It's unclear, but let's not get too bogged down upon this, because let's read a little bit about the story of Joshua and Jesus. So let me just get to it. Right, so here's the story. So this comes from the book of the Talmud called Sota, and it's on page 47a of Sota. So let's start this way. It starts by talking about, I didn't give it to you because there's just too much backstory I can give to you. However, there was an incident in which King Yanai, now King Yanai is refers to Alexander Janai, who was a Jewish Hasmonean king. And as it turns out, Alexander Janai was influenced by the Sadducees, who were the priests, and the Sadducees wanted to kill off all of the Pharisees, the early rabbis. And so King Yanai was influenced by the Sadducees and went ahead and tried to kill all the sages. So what is this incident? When King Yanai was killing the sages, Shimon ben Shetach was hidden by his sister, Yanai's wife, while Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia went and fled to Alexandria of Egypt. When peace was made between Yanai and the sages, Shimon ben Shetach sent him the following letter. And by the way, if you're curious about who Shimon ben Shetach is, I'll tell you that he appears in the 8th Mishnah. And the reason why I tell you that means so he is kind of the next generation after Parachia. So when peace was made between Yanai and the sages, Shimon ben Shetach sent him the following letter. From myself, Jerusalem, the holy city, to you, Alexandria of Egypt. My sister, my husband, dwells within you, and I am sitting desolate. So he's speaking in code language as Shimon ben Shetach, but what he's saying is, we're separated. My sister / my husband, in other words, my loved one is living in Egypt, and I am here in Jerusalem, and I miss you, and I want you back. And Yehoshua ben Parachia said, I can learn from it that there is peace, and I can return. So, what do we also know about Yehoshua ben Parachia? Well, we also know that he lived in Egypt for a period of time as he was escaping the potential execution. But the story gets better.
Ari, where are we
So
in
again,
the reading?
It's now just on the screen.
Okay, is there a number?
I see. We are on number, we're reading from number 6.
Uh-huh.
But I'm now giving you background materials which I did not send you.
Okay.
Bob and Cook.
Good enough. Just wanted to be.
Sure. Bob and Cook. Can you see the screen? Can you see what I put on the screen?
My question for you is, what were the years of King Yanai?
Right. So there's unfortunately there's 3 Alexander Yanais, grandson, son, grandfather, or
Right.
fathers, get the point. And so therefore it could be over a course of a number of different years. Most likely it matches up with King Alexander Janai II, who was living in around 120.
120 CE?
BCE. BCE.
Okay. BC. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So again, by the way, just making sure, Phil, do you see what's written on the screen? Do you see what's on the screen at least?
Well, I have several screens in front of me.
Do you see
so
me kind of scrolling up with text?
Now I see the text scrolling.
Okay, good.
Up. Yeah.
So this is the continuation of that story when it just follows it. When Shimon ben Shetach sends a note to Yehoshua ben Parachia to come back. So here we go. When he came back to Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yehoshua arrived at a certain inn. The innkeeper stood before him, honoring him considerably, and overall they accorded him great honor. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia then sat and was praising them by saying, how beautiful is this inn? Jesus the Nazarene, one of his students, said to him, my teacher, but the eyes of the innkeeper's wife are narrow. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia said to him, wicked one, is this what you are engaged in, gazing at women? He brought out 400 shofars and excommunicated him. And every day Jesus would come before him, but he would not accept his wish to return. All right, so let's just start there. So this is the beginning of the story of which, by the way, it continues, but the beginning of the story of Jesus and his teacher, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia. So again, how is it possible that Jesus would have lived in 120? He didn't. How is it possible then that Yehoshua ben Parachia lived in 120 and was Jesus' teacher? Unclear. So it's either the story, he is Jesus' teacher, which I kind of think he is, but maybe I'm wrong, and he is Jesus' teacher, and they're just blending two narratives, or it could be that he's not Jesus' teacher, but rather they're just ascribing him to be Jesus' teacher because maybe they didn't know or whatever. But nonetheless, what do we get so far out of this experience between Yehoshua and Jesus? Anybody have any feelings or comments?
Well, I'd like to say that Yehoshua from Nazareth would have been a common name. It doesn't mean that it's the Jesus from Christianity.
That's true. That's true. Good point. Laura.
I'm fascinated by the comment where Jesus said, "But the eyes of the innkeeper's wife are narrow."
Right.
And he is called out not just for looking at women, but it is such, on the surface at least, a prejudicial remark.
Right. Or superficial at minute, right? It's like,
Superficial, yes. I'm
like,
just,
look how
I'm
beautiful this place is. Oh yeah, but she's not so beautiful. So, right. So clearly you're wrong, right? It seems so absurd.
it's just the antithesis of what we are taught or told that Jesus is like.
Right.
You know, this kind human, you know, loving to everybody.
Right.
And so
Now,
that just
I do
really
wanna-
stands out to me.
Yeah, I do want to point out that regardless of when this is taking place, I do want to point out that Jesus didn't really establish his ministry until the last couple years of his life, right? So let's assume this is the Jesus that we know, which I kind of think it is. Then, you know, it's what it teaches us is, and we do know that Jesus lived in Egypt for a while, and we don't really know much about Jesus's life in the middle 30 years of his life, let's say. So a lot of this does kind of add up. But what I am just pointing out is, assuming that he is still kind of like this pisher kid, let's say, that he really hasn't become the Jesus that we kind of heard about, then at minimum we can at least say that you know he's still learning, right? He's still, you know, he's not quite Jesus yet. He's just kind of Jesus the student. But I do fully agree with you, Laura, that it is striking that, you know, at least at minimum, the person that we think of Jesus would say what appears to be such a superficial and almost irrelevant kind of criticism that the innkeeper's wife, like that it's not that she's not beautiful, it's just that her eyes there's something wrong with her eyes, and so it kind of takes away from her beauty. Just kind of interesting. Bob and Cookie.
My comment to you is we're assuming, and from the conversation you have now, that the Christian view of what Jesus is or who he is correct. And I don't know that we can do that. Given it was written many, many years after his death and was written up an idea to make him look as he did. I mean, I just finished reading Max de Mont's appointment in Jerusalem about the life of Jesus, the historic Jesus, and I've read some other things. And as I say, it ain't what necessarily we think it's going to be. My own sense is that
Right.
We need to look at him in a historic context and where he was at that time and who wrote these comments. John wrote 90 years after his death, and you have Mark and Luke, and they all wrote at different times with the idea to pump up who he was because of the intent to establish a religion. I'm saying this in a short form, other than and separate themselves from Judaism. So I think it's wrong to assume that Jesus is who everybody thinks, at least the Christians think he is. I'm not saying some of the things are wrong, but I just think we make certain assumptions because Christianity pushes us in that direction. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I would say that for me, again, this is for me, and I admit that I am a student of that period in Jesus and the New Testament. I do read about it and care about it. So I don't want to say that I'm just kind of spouting things off, but admittedly, I'm just a student. I don't put myself out there to be an expert. But what I would say about Jesus is that many of the things that are reported about him are probably, in my opinion, historical. Obviously, turning water into wine and the walking on water and all that stuff. Like when it comes to miracles, obviously I'm much more skeptical. And certainly when it comes to resurrection, that is like off, not even close to where I am. But like, given a Sermon on the Mount and many of the things that he said, I kind of find them to be somewhat believable, to be perfectly honest. And so, so reading about this, from my perspective, what I'm seeing is more of, boy, he made this one comment about, well, innkeeper's wife's not so good looking. And he is excommunicated with 400 shofars, right? Like immediately, where did Joshua ben Parachia come up with these 400 shofars? Like right on the spot to excommunicate him. And isn't that a little excessive? And so like my senses as I read this, I think to myself, wow, our text is really trying to make a story out of this and make a point out of this. So, but I understand what you're saying, Bob, of course. Like certainly in just the same way that any kind of prototypical person in the story of a religion is kind of, there's a myth about that person, which is way different than what the reality is. I think that parts of this is there's probably a fair amount of truth or history to it. But I do agree with you about the bigger picture.
I have a question though.
Go ahead.
My idea, or maybe it's not a question, maybe it's a statement. If he's a student at that time, and this is his teacher, assume more like he's 14 or 15 or whatever, that really yucky age of preteen or teen. And
Right.
and I don't think he was saying it in terms of she's ugly. I think he was saying it in terms of, yeah, but she can't be trusted. She's giving you like the evil eye, not the welcoming eye. And so he's being put in his place is basically what it's come down to. And he's got to humble himself before they're going to let him back in again.
Yep.
Rabbi, we just finished reading that you shouldn't be talking to any women, your wife or anybody else, and you should be ignoring all women.
Right.
Yeah.
And here, so now Jesus is saying there's a woman in the house.
Yeah.
And just because of that, you're not supposed to even acknowledge that women exist.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Except what you're doing is they're making these statements, and these statements are being codified, 200 years later. I mean, although presumably, since it was just the previous one, that maybe he had learned it from his teachers because they were his teachers who said that.
Yeah.
But it's also possible that, and again, by the way, they're not. But for what it's worth, this is not a person who they're not having a conversation with her. They're having a conversation amongst themselves and saying, yeah, but she's not so good looking, right? So they're not interacting with her. They're just kind of, or Jesus is just referencing her. But of course, again, we'll have to ask ourselves if there's, how true the story really is. But good point, Barbara, in terms of they should have been mindful of the previous Mishnah. Yes, Laura.
Cookie, I like your comment about that it wasn't about her looks, but maybe she was untrustworthy. I think
Right.
that's interesting to look at it that way, and I hadn't thought of that, and I like that interpretation. But I wondered also if you could, Bob, could you put the title of the book you were referring to in the chat?
In the
Please?
chat.
In the chat?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
we'll do it. We'll do it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay,
So-
I'm good.
So it could be untrustworthy, and I mean, I can like take a quick look at it and see if we can kind of get anything more from. Let's see if I.
While you're doing that, I'll just comment. I'm wondering why this is even any kind of subject to talk about. So maybe she was Oriental and that's why her eyes were narrow.
Mhm.
But why talk about it in the Mishnah? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. It's not talking about it in the Mishnah. This is the Talmud later. I'm using it to kind of say, let me explain to you about who this person, Joshua ben Parachia, is. So it's not in the Mishnah. It's a story in the Talmud that I am now bringing forth as a little background for Rabbi Yehoshua.
So it's
Sorry.
late. So it's
Okay.
later. It's about 500. It's being written.
Well, that's when it's finally written. Yes. So, but you know, yes, but but this story obviously could have been around for a long time, but it finally got put in the Talmud. So if you're living in 400 CE, you may not be familiar with this story because it hasn't been written in a book yet, even though it theoretically happened 400 years earlier. Sorry.
What you showed us in this paragraph, I think this is the background why Yoshua ben Parachia said the number 6 that we read, והווי דן את כל אדם לכף זכות, and judge all men with the scale weighted in his favor, meaning Yoshua ben Parachia gave a compliment about the inn.
Yep.
And then Jesus of Nazareth gave a negative fact. So Yoshua ben Parachia says, always look at the positive side of the people,
That's
not the negative side.
That's right. I'll tell you what, let's keep reading the story from the Talmud. So if we can get a little bit more background.
Rabbi, I have a question. So
Go
if
ahead.
this was written 500 years later, so it was after the time that Jesus was made to, people thought that he was a god, or
Yep.
so this is after the fact, that this is not before when he was just a person.
Yep.
So is it possible that whoever was writing this is trying to be negative to the fact that Jesus was not really a God, not really the Son of God, and they're trying to put something in there that says this is just a normal person?
Yes and no. Yes and no. And why don't we keep reading, and maybe we'll be able to glean from it. So it's a good point. And yes, I would definitely think to myself, I would definitely go there, except the Talmud continues. So let's keep reading. Okay. So this story continues. Remember, this is 47a 13, and 13 isn't. It's just how it just kind of communicates that it's the next paragraph. Okay. So 13. Now we're at 14. One day, Rabbi Yoshua ben Parachia was reciting the Shema when Jesus came before him. Now remember, I forgot to just to point out, every day Jesus would come before him, but he would not accept his wish to return. And by the way, the Hebrew is, it's an Aramaic, so you can't really tell, but it's basically saying every day Jesus came to kind of make amends, apologize, do teshuvah, but they wouldn't let him. One day, so one second. Okay. So one day, Rabbi Yoshua ben Parachia was reciting the Shema when Jesus came before him. So in other words, he's in the middle of his morning Shema, and Jesus approaches him. He intended to accept him on this occasion. Rabbi Joshua ben Parachia intended to kind of say, all right, you're forgiven, or I get the fact that you made a mistake, so let's just let bygones be bygones and let's keep going in terms of our studying together. He intended to accept him on this occasion. So he signaled to him with his hand to wait. So in other words, what happens, he's just like, he's doing the Shema and he sees Jesus and he wants something, and he's like, woo, 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 like that. You can imagine, woo, 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 like that. And and so he says, so he signaled him with his hand like that. Jesus thought he was rejecting him entirely. He therefore went and stood up a brick and worshiped it as an idol. The Gemara, Rabbi Yoshua ben Parachia said to him, return from your sins. Jesus said to him, this is the tradition that I received from you. Anyone who sins and causes the masses to sin is not given the opportunity to repent. So what he's saying is, so Jesus feels like he's being rejected. Joshua ben Parachia didn't mean it. In fact, he feels bad about it. And he's like, and Jesus, though, goes and puts a brick up and he pretends like it's an idol. And Joshua ben Parachia says, no, don't do that. Just keep doing your teshuvah, your repentance. Keep, it's okay. But Jesus doesn't have anything of it. And he says, nope, this is what you once taught me. You once said that anyone who sins and causes the masses to sin is not given the opportunity to repent. By the way, now that is a reference to the future. So the point is that the Talmud is trying to communicate, hey, it's not okay what Jesus did by not just sinning, but leading hordes and hordes and thousands of people as followers and disciples to sin also, to depart from the ways of the Torah. So the Talmud is definitely saying Jesus was a sinner. But at that point, but that's not the case, because he didn't cause the masses to sin in that moment. That's just a future thing. But anyway, the Gemara explains how he caused the masses to sin. For the master said, Jesus, the Nazarene, performed sorcery, and he incited the masses and subverted the masses and caused the Jewish people to sin. Now, of course, that's just their justification for it. They're just that's how they're claiming that he caused the masses to sin. We know that they're really referencing later in the future. But putting aside, what we do see is that Joshua ben Parachia wants to bring him back, but Jesus misunderstands it. And now we have this problem in which we've got these two people who have these irreconcilable differences. Suri, do you have your hand up, or is that from before?
I'm sorry, I will take it down.
Okay, so fine. So now let me just reference another quick piece, which is from the Talmud book called Sanhedrin. It says, the sages taught, always have the left hand drive sinners away and the right draw them near, so that the sinner will not totally despair of atonement. In other words, yes, you don't want the sinners near you, but at the same time, you want to help bring them to a place of forgiveness and teshuvah. This is unlike Elisha, who pushed away Gehazi with his two hands and caused him to lose his share in the world to come. And unlike Yoshua ben Parachia, who pushed away Jesus the Nazarene with two hands. In other words, what it's saying in the Talmud in a different place is saying that they recognize that that Joshua pushed Jesus away. And that Joshua, to some degree, is almost responsible for Jesus kind of going off and doing this whole thing. And which is creating Christianity. And that had Joshua ben Parachia been a little bit better in terms of a little bit more patient and not so quick to dismiss Jesus, maybe we wouldn't have the type of influence that Christianity is to this day, which, by the way, is in 500 BCE. Excuse me, 500 CE. So,
Rabbi, just a minute. I can see Sanhedrin on the screen, but I can't. It looks like 10, and then I can't read after 10.
107b. 107b. 107b is the page.
Okay.
Mark.
It seems to me that perhaps even if we accept this incident as having happened and interpreted differently by two different passages, it seems to me that it's hard to accept that one incident would explain, him deciding to leave the fold and go off on his own. I mean, it's possible, but one
Right.
incident alone just is hard to.
It is possible, except, I mean, but on the other hand, I feel like I'm trying to remember where, like how many times do you see the preacher's kid or the rabbi's kid or, who grew up in this one way and then kind of has a change of heart and then goes completely the opposite. Or there's like the examples of the people who are, I forget what we saw the film and read about it. Sarit did a program with it. The two Hamas people, who realize that that this is
Right.
crazy what they're doing. In other words, so it does happen that
Well, I
one
can
event
absolutely,
can kind of spur.
I absolutely agree with you, just not based on one incident. People who have a change of heart about their beliefs take a little while to mature that kind of belief. Now, maybe this was a triggering incident or something like that, but because he fought with his father, he created, or his teacher, he created Christianity. It's like,
Right.
okay.
It's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. But at the same time, is it too much to suggest that because he didn't create Christianity?
Right.
Paul,
You're right.
the apostle
Right.
Paul did, or Saul of Tarsus, and then
Right.
Luke and Mark and all these guys did. But he just kind of said he just created an alternative to mainstream Judaism, and as a result, and what other people how they experienced it was what became a new religion altogether. But from Jesus' perspective, he was just trying to bring in a little bit more sensitivity and kindness to Judaism. So now let's go to our text. And now that
Rabbi,
we've got,
this is so modern as well in that pushing away a character or an important person, and then what happens after they get they do their own thing. If you think about Martin Luther King, who was put in jail and beaten, and what came after that. So our whole history has this of people that are pushed away, but then come back to do great things.
right. That's for sure. That is for sure.
And don't we have a tradition that when someone wants to convert, you say no to them 3 times before you accept them?
We do, in fact, have that tradition. That is correct. That is absolutely correct. So let's take a look at the text now. And now that we have a little background of Joshua ben Parachia, and by the way, we know so much more about Joshua ben Parachia than we do Nitai the Arbalite. Remembering, of course, again, that Nitai was kind of the second. He was kind of the vice president. But still, let's just read a little bit about more. Let's read about what Joshua ben Parachia said. It's somewhat of a famous Mishnah. It's somewhat of a famous example from Pirkei Avot. I quote it all the time. I love this one. But so it says, Joshua ben Parachia used to say, appoint for thyself a teacher, acquire for thyself a companion, and judge all men with the scale weighed in their favor. So let's start with appoint for thyself a teacher. What do you think he's trying to say? Anybody?
Find someone to study under.
Yeah.
Find someone you can learn from.
Yep. Yep.
Don't be a know-it-all.
That's true too. I would add to it, like take the initiative, right? It's not just have a person, but like find that person. Find a teacher for you. Find a person who can help you be a better person. And then while we're at it, what's interesting to me, and I can imagine Barbara pointing this out, so I'll beat Barbara Wingrove to the punch here. You know, Yossi, was it, Yossi Yoezer of Zereda said, open your door to all the sages. And, Yossi ben Yochanan was like, oh, in fact, open your door to everybody. And Parachi is saying, well, maybe not so many. Just open your metaphoric door to just one person. Find a teacher that you can just learn at their foot, and just soak everything in. And, I'm curious about how people feel about that, because on the one hand, there's the value of just having just one person that you learn from and that you just kind of become their utter disciple. But on the other hand, there's of course the value of learning from lots of people and not just one person. So, Sarit, what do you think?
Rabbi, I do not know if you said it before, but I think that it's important to mention that Yoshua ben Prachia and Nitaya Arbeli were, and you will need to explain to the people the difference. I do not know the concepts in English. They were Prushim. You said at the beginning that Yoshua ben Prachia was humble, and the difference between the Prushim, and they lived at that time. The Prushim, the Prushim were looking to learn to study the Torah, and even more. And in order to concentrate on this, they didn't want the people to think that a person knows everything. Always you have to seek for a teacher, for a mentor, for a Rav, and you have to believe in him and to strive for his knowledge and input as much as you can. In this particular time, I think that they wrote a Selech Harav, they meant only one teacher.
Right.
And later on, when we are saying now a Selech Harav, meaning always strive to learn from the others. You do not know everything on everything. So, but
right.
at that time, they looked for one guru.
I agree with you. And I would say, and by the way, Sarit said it in Hebrew, a Selecha Rav. Rav means rabbi. So get for yourself teacher. A rabbi. But it can also mean teacher. It can also mean teacher. Yes. No, for sure. My point though is that Parachia is clearly communicating that having one teacher, one person that you just learn from everything, that you just become a disciple of, that's the value. Whereas prior, Yossi ben Yoezer was saying, well, no, it's good to have lots. And I can see the value of both sides, right? But at the same time, if you're learning from lots of people, sure, the breadth and expanse of what you're learning is considerably more. I can remember when I was in rabbinical school, there got to a point in which I felt like I was listening to the same things from my teachers, because it's not like we had hundreds and hundreds of professors. We had 25 professors at my rabbinical school, 25 professors. And so therefore, and you took the same professor a handful of times. And, and after a while, if you took their core course and then you took an elective, and then if you took a second elective with them, all of a sudden you said, yeah, boy, I'm hearing the same things from them. And so on the one hand, you can start to kind of hear repetition over and over again. But on the other hand, when you have one teacher giving you one clear message that's not kind of contrasted by another teacher's message. It's not to say that one's saying something wrong, but might be, I'm taking guitar, for example. And in the guitar that I'm taking, like there's various different ways that I can make this miserable chord called a B minor. B minor is a really tough chord for me to make, and there's various different ways. And one teacher might say do it this way, another teacher might say do it this way. By the way, both of them are hard. My point is that if I have one teacher, I've got one teacher telling me the way to do it, and then there's no confusion or contradiction. But if you've got many teachers, they might be telling you different ways to make a B minor. Laura,
Rabbi,
yeah, Sarit.
I just want to mention the language here, in Hebrew and also in English. Aseh lecha rab, appoint. They are using a verb
Right.
of appoint a teacher. At least this sentence, they are giving the people the freedom to choose the teacher.
Right. Yep. You have the freedom. You don't have, it's not one specific, but make for yourself a teacher. I agree. Laura.
I think it's interesting. One of the things I take from it is that Joshua ben Parachia, it could also be that he's saying, learning from one versus the sages, it narrows your focus and not always in a good way. And I think of that, and then going back to the backstories that you were reading to us, and he was also a bit narrow-minded in not forgiving Jesus of Nazareth.
Right.
And so maybe Joshua ben Parachia is a less generous of thought man than
right. I think,
Eliezer.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I think that last part of it, the last part about judging all people with the scale weighed in his favor.
That's different, yes.
That, by the way, I think is a direct reference to what happened. I think he regretted painfully what happened. You could see, you saw that he felt like he tried to bring Jesus back. He realized he had made a mistake, and he tried to give, to change things up a little bit. Now, granted, he didn't have to give Jesus the wait one finger, to tell him to hold on a moment, but he did. But that was what he chose to do. But at least the text is communicating that this teacher did kind of recognize that maybe he was wrong and needed to kind of soften his stance. But by the time he made that decision, it was too late. And so he is now and again, that's the most famous, that story that I read to you. It's not like I just cherry picked the story. Like, that's the famous story of Parachia. It's not like you're going to go and find other great stories about Parachia. There are other elements and references to him, but that's like the richest story that we have about him. So therefore, as a result, I have to use that story as the basis for my thinking about him. And therefore, as a result, I have to be thinking, wow, when he then kind of comes up with this comment as his signature comment, which is judge all men with the scale weighed in his favor, I think what Joshua ben Parachia is saying, boy, did I make a huge mistake. And if you want to know one thing that I've learned in my life, judge everyone with the scale weighed in his favor. Right? It's like his, these are my parting words to you after what I learned the hard way during my life. Bob, Cookie, thought.
The first part about the one teacher.
Yeah.
He's coming back from having gone out of Jerusalem or wherever they were, near Nazareth, to Egypt. He left and he came back.
That's
right?
correct. Uh-huh.
So how many teachers are left at this point, and how much history do they have to get from whoever's left?
Okay, so while it is true that Alexander Janai attempted to exterminate or assassinate all of the sages at the time, he wasn't successful altogether. So there were a handful of people who were still there, but he killed most of them. So right, it's if what you're saying is, boy, it seems a little self-serving for Joshua ben Parachi to, to have said, find yourself a teacher because I'm the only one left. It's like,
I'm saying, no, not, I'm the only one left, but there's a gap in here. And if you really want to know the history that came before you, you need to go and find yourself a good sage.
yeah, that's true. By the way, let's not forget about the second part of this, and acquire for thyself a companion, right? So there's a lot of ways to understand that. So number one is the word for companion is chaver in Hebrew. So what's a chaver?
A friend.
A friend, right? So, and in terms of Hebrew, now this is biblical Hebrew and not necessarily Mishnaic Hebrew, but still it's worth me saying that oftentimes when you have a vav at the beginning of a word, while of course it means and, it also can mean then.
No.
So it could be that that this word aseh lecharav, make for yourself a teacher. Now the kind of the straightforward translation is and acquire for yourself a friend, but it could also be then acquire for yourself a friend. In other words, it could be like when you make a teacher, you therefore acquire a friend. Thoughts? Sorry, you have a thought?
Yes. First of all, וקנה לך חבר, it's in the meaning of find your teacher, and it's always good to learn in chavruta.
Yes, absolutely. That is what it's
in a companion.
Yep.
But again, I want to concentrate on the language.
Yep.
וקנה לך חבר, acquire.
Purchase a friend.
Exactly, purchase. You have to invest a lot when you have a friend, or you have to invest a lot, and it goes until today. And it's always good to learn in chavruta, like what we are doing right now. We are
right. So this is a valuable thing. I just want to punctuate what Sarit's saying. So a chavruta comes from the word chaver. You hear the chavara, and now the word chavruta is when two or three people or more sit together and study together. So therefore, if I had like a rabbi or a friend that I said, okay, every week let's just sit here and let's just study together. And let's just talk about the issues, kind of like what we're doing here. That's chavruta, which is it's like a little study group. It's like a chavruta is the equivalent of when you were in school and you had a couple friends who went and studied for your exam together.
Is it the same as a cohort?
A cohort, just a group, just your little mini study group.
Okay.
Is a chavruta, and I think, and so part of what it's saying is find yourself a rabbi, like learn everything, but then also find yourself a little group of people that you can then talk about it and discuss it with, and then go over and over with it, so you're making sure that you're getting everything correct. Mary.
It occurred to me that maybe that the sequence is go find yourself a teacher. That's more important than having a friend. Do that first.
Right. So that's a good point. Like take care of the important things before you take care of your social life.
Right. Is to take care of your learning.
Learning first, then fun. No, that's really interesting. I've never read it that way, but I completely, now that you point that out, I'm now completely affected by that. Yeah. That's another, like, part of the reason why these things are so fabulous is because you really can read these aphorisms, these sayings on so many different levels and so many different ways, and you can glean so much from it. So I totally agree with that, as I agree with the fact that you need you need a teacher and you need a group to study with. As I agree with the fact that maybe if you have a teacher, you also have a friend. Like, there's so many different things I agree with.
Rabbi, it seems to me that what it's saying is that just learning for yourself is not enough. You need to bring other people along with you and have them learn as well.
I like that too.
Ooh.
I like that too. It's not just about learning yourself, but it's like making sure that you're encouraging and inviting others to learn. I love that. I love that. Cookie, is your hand up, or is that from before?
Yeah, I raised it just because Bob set up the little chat, but we don't know how to send it.
Oh, push enter on your keyboard.
Just anywhere, or
Yeah.
where the chat is.
Oh, anywhere.
Does anybody see a chat from Bob?
Nope. Maybe it's like you have to click on the words first and then click back on the words and then press enter.
Okay.
And I do think, by the way, you know, that the last part of it, because we're done in a moment, but the last part of it, which is, you know, judge all people with the scale. I know it says men, but let's just change it. With the scale weighed in his/her favor. You know, I think, you know, from a very, very basic level, you know, it seems pretty clear. Look, it's saying, hey, you know, give benefit of the doubt to people, right? I mean, and this happens a lot, right? And this is very, very contemporary, which is how often in your life does it happen in which, you know, we've demonized people and they can do no right, you know, no matter what the case is,
Right.
right? I mean, how many people have felt that way about political figures? How many people have felt that way about their spouse? How many people have felt that way about their next door neighbor, or about, you know, celebrities of some sort that that so often, you know, we get an opinion about somebody and then they are forever affected, and they are forever you know, just typecast almost by what it is that you have, your initial opinion about them is. And what it's saying is, give people the benefit of the doubt. You know what? It's not always as bad as you might. They may not all be as bad as you think they are. And yes, we may know that by the time that the Talmud was written, we had a very, very tenuous at best, but I would say oppositional relationship with Christianity. However, at the time when the Mishnah was written, that was not the case. And we know, and Joshua ben Parachia knows, that he kind of pushed Jesus away. And, you know, had he been a little bit more welcoming and been a little bit more accepting of the fact that, you know, Jesus isn't such a bad guy. He had good thoughts, he had good ideas, and he certainly wasn't necessarily. By the way, I seem to remember I was looking for it in one of the books that I had, but I couldn't find it. So we'll have to just trust me on this. Just trust me on this. And that was, I seem to remember that the expression about narrow eyes, it appears in other places too, and I'm trying to remember what it was, and I can't off the top of my head, but it appears in other places too, and it doesn't communicate that a person is not attractive. It has to do with something else. I just can't remember what it is, but my point is that Joshua ben Parachia may very likely have overreacted. Maybe he was unhappy with something that Jesus the Nazarene was doing at the time. Maybe Jesus was saying things which were, you know, the beginnings of kind of a rebellion, so to speak, but in a rebellion in a more gentle way from Judaism, like a rebellion from kind of like the intense kind of strictness of Judaism. And maybe Joshua ben Parachia was, hey, this guy is a loose cannon, and I'm not loving what's going on here. And, you know, and now everything that comes out of Jesus's mouth is that Joshua ben Parachia sees it within the lens of, oh, this is a loose cannon. And you know, and now he's like saying, well, maybe I should have been a little bit more, you know, given him the benefit of the doubt and not just assume the worst. And Yeah, it's a really, really interesting and excellent lesson for us. Anybody but the parting thoughts? Cookie,
Yeah.
I know you're still trying
I
to.
do.
It's
I
still
do.
up on.
Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing all of us could probably agree on from this lesson today is that we are very lucky because we do have a rove. What a great lesson. Thank you. This is just so good.
Thanks, Jay. Really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But yeah, so yeah, this is, by the way, this class has been a joy it's like preparing for this class is a joy. As I keep telling you, like the part, and we're going to keep doing this all through all these chapters. The best part about this is learning about these characters. They're not just people saying sayings and, like you've like, oh, whatever. Or think of it this way. Think about your Passover Seder, right? At your Passover Seder, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Azariah, and Gamliel, and they were sitting around and they were discussing, and that, until someone came down and said, hey, it's time for the Shema. You read that at the Seder, but like what my goal is that these aren't just random names, but maybe we'll get to know these guys a little bit better. Unfortunately, not women, all guys, but we'll get to know these people a little bit better. And suddenly they won't just be names for us, but rather there'll be a little bit of background. And so when we read these famous stories, we won't just remember the saying, but maybe remember the person who said it. So therefore the saying has meaning to us. And so for me, I just want you to know that I'm having a ball like preparing for this and studying this and getting into it, because I think it's really fascinating and interesting, and we can really glean a lot from it. So anyway, but as a reminder before you go, please just remember that starting next week, we will be doing our class on Tuesday evening. The reason why we are doing it on Tuesday evening is to see if there is a group of people that appreciate having an evening class and not a daytime class. If it is just you in the evening and no one else, then I will ask you, tell me what's better for you, and we'll take a vote. If, on the other hand, there are lots of people who are different people who work during the day and wish they could do more of these things, but just can't because because they can't afford, then it'll say something and maybe we'll keep it in the evenings. I'm just trying to tell you that's my plan. So I'm not mixing it up just because I want to mess with you and confuse you. I'm really doing this just to see what meets the most people's needs and what works best for most people. But I assure you, if it's really just the same people here, you'll get a choice. You want to do it in the evening? You want to do it in the morning? We'll take a vote. Majority wins. Anyway. Bob,
I love this class.
Cookie, one last.
What time on Tuesday, Rabbi?
7 o'clock.
Thank you.
And starting the first, right?
What's that?
How is Paul Schatzberg doing? Do you know?
Yes, he's doing fine.
Paul, okay.
He's doing fine.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everybody. Be
I
well.
love this class. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great
Thank
class.
you,
Thank you.
Take care.
Rabbi,
Coming. Bye. Sorry, got a phone call. I'm late for something. Go ahead.
so Rabbi,
Oh yes, sorry. I know you
yeah.
want to talk to me.
Yes, so do you want to talk now? Or you need
You know
to
what? I
go?
can't. I'll talk to you later, but I'll talk to you. I'll call you back.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
And thank you for the class. Toda.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.